Interlude, the new militia. The recruit known as Rembley kneeled alongside the other members of his training platoon. They all listened to Colonel Darstad describing the various fighting tactics to expect when engaging the Black Warrior Legion and counter-movements they will have planned. The colonel glimmered in his aqua-blue armor and was a commanding presence to the men gathered before him. The recruit Rembley had joined the resistance along with hundreds of others. He and many others had been refugees from the burning of the villages ordered by High Priest Cassius. The burnings had begun soon after the many defeats the Black Warrior's army had suffered at the hands of the resistance force. Every recruit had heard the stories, how General Hecate had armored and trained a new cavalry, archery, and infantry force that rivaled that of the Black Warrior Legion. Despite the overwhelming numbers of the Black Warrior Legion, the balance of power came from the superior armor and weapons the members of the new militia used. Each member of the resistance was given special armor like the one he now wore, a glimmering metallic tunic that offered superior protection against sword and arrow. The armor was made of a dark red material that slightly glinted. Runes were inscribed into the material of the armor, and each person's movements were well supported by the special material that molded itself to your form. Rembley hefted the short sword he carried in his dominant hand, and once again remarked to himself how light the weapon was. His weapon, and those of the other resistance members, was provided by General Hecate's brother, Romero, who lived in the western mountains. The blade almost seemed to hum with deadly sharpness, and runes that matched those upon his armor were inscribed along the blade. Rembley was part of the infantry and was trained by Darstad in hand-to-hand melee tactics. Carrying a short buckler shield that was made of the same material as his sword upon his left forearm, Rembley moved through the various swipe and stabbing attacks demonstrated by the colonel. After a series of the grueling movements were completed, the colonel called out for everyone to break for sustenance and to return to their barracks to prepare for the upcoming skirmish. Rembley walked through the encampment as many individuals wearing slightly different colors of armor and uniform walked about. Each person was set upon their various errands for the resistance force that had grown since the Battle of the Sordid Tavern. The young recruit glanced over to his left as he passed the firing range and saw the gorgeous Captain Janae standing in her special dark red armor. Nearby, her assistant Lieutenant Hope led the 100-strong archery force through the hours of long drills of shooting arrows in different ways, based on signaled commands that were given with different colored flags. Captain Janae's personal attendant Benny was seen standing nearby holding the red flag of the resistance. Rembley could see the motif of their band, an encircled dagger etched upon the background of black coloring. The archers had been instrumental in holding off the Black Warriors in the guerrilla movements the resistance had been using in the last 2 years of fightings and skirmishes. In a far field that had been cleared next to the fallback headquarters, Rembley could just make out Captain Cerberus, who worked with his 50 cavalry, who all rode upon trained raft horses. The young recruit shook his head in wonder as he saw the animals turn in perfect unison after a trilling sound from their riders. The cavalrymen wore a glinting dark green colored armor and attacked the enemy with poleaxe or curved sword. Their armor and weapons were made in the same fashion as the others, offering the supportive movement and superior defense against bladed weapons. No blade, not even the ones made by Romero, could penetrate the armor. But the armor was still vulnerable to crushing attacks, and many of the warriors wore a buckler shield upon their forearms. Rembley looked across at Colonel Jason, who was leading his elite warriors out into the nearby forest for their daily routine of special operations. In his fire-colored armor, the glimmering colonel walked with his personal guard, elite warriors that were 20 in number and selected by he and General Hecate for their talents in hand-to-hand fighting. These special warriors all carried hand-to-hand fist weapons, daggers, or a short metallic staff. It was said that each of the elite warriors was worth 3 of the standard infantry, something he easily believed when he saw the warriors in battle. Rembley arrived at his barracks and sat upon his personal cot. His platoon sergeant was busy calling out the night watch assignment. Rembley looked at his platoon sergeant with an endearing respect. The man was one of the original prisoners, freed by General Hecate and the early resistance. Often at night, the sergeant would recount the tale of the early days of training 2 years ago. Recently liberated from a prison quarry within the Great Forest, he and several of his mates had been supplied armor and weapons by Marvin at the old tavern before it had fallen. Wearing the fine armor and hefting a short sword that had once belonged to a fallen Black Warrior Legionnaire, with strong emotion in his voice, the platoon sergeant had remarked how it felt to receive his first month's wage of 10 silvers after living as a prisoner for so long. He had stood with 180 others when General Hecate had arrived with the other leaders, in his fantastic flying craft and began handing out the new armor and weapons from the armor master Romero. As several of the men began donning the new unique armor that molded itself to you, General Hecate had addressed the men and had said more armor and weapons were coming. Soon, all would wear the superior armor of his brother Romero. He explained the armor and weapons would give them the edge they would need to defeat the Black Warriors. The men had felt like gods when they had the new armor upon their bodies. Romero had arrived 2 days later in a gigantic hovering coach that was powered by some unknown force. Landing the craft next to the tavern, the tall, glowing man and several aides began unloading his contents from the large vehicle to the bewildered men that had gathered beside it. Romero had brought a full complement of his superior armors and short swords and began to distribute the items to the assembled fighters in haste, notifying Hecate the first Black Warriors would arrive the following day. Aware of the impending arrival of their enemy, General Hecate had outlined his counterattack plan and had used the 2 days since his return to prepare the fighters as best he could. Just as the armor master Romero had projected, the first Black Warrior legions had appeared from the forest the following morning. The platoon sergeant's voice was thick with pride as he described the battle of the tavern that had occurred. There were 600 legionnaires in full Black Warrior armor, led by 7 legion commanders. The special commanders all wielded their vibronic force weapons and were slowly marching their men up the hill toward the tavern. Having secretly prepared ambush holes in the fields leading up to the tavern, many of the resistance force lay in hiding as the Black Warriors approached. As the main bulk of the Black Warriors surrounded the apparently abandoned tavern, General Hecate appeared on the hill overlooking the tavern. He was dressed in full battle armor that glimmered a silvery white color in the rising morning sun and was carrying the first flag of the resistance in front of him. He slammed the flag into the ground and, using the special powers of his voice, had shouted, "Now!" Just as the loud echoing command was given, the nearby tavern exploded in a large bloom of noise and fire. The burning debris sprayed out over the closest Dark Warriors, catching many of them on fire. The debris contained a strange burning liquid that sprayed out over many of the Dark Warriors. 50 of the Dark Warriors lay on fire and unmoving on the ground. 100 more ran around on fire and burning from the effects of the liquid fire. As the remaining Dark Warriors attempted to regroup, Hecate signaled to his awaiting warriors. A loud, alerting tone powered out over the sounds of screaming and burning as the next phase of the plan was put into motion. All the hiding resistance forces popped out of their ambush holes and ran screaming into the milling throng of confused Dark Warriors. The sounds of battle ensued as men struck against one another with various weapons. The armor and weapons of Romero were true, and the smaller force was able to last longer against the Black Warriors, whose weapons could not pierce the armors of the attacking resistance members. Just then, another trumpet note sounded, and Cerberus, leading a small cavalry force of 10, charged at the enemy. The group began slicing their weapons into the flank of the confused Dark Warriors, taking out large groups of the men with each pass. A hail of precise arrows began raining down on the Dark Warriors and plunged into unprotected necks or sections of flesh. Captain Janae and her small group of archers carefully took aim from hidden positions near the destroyed tavern and fired their missiles into the fray, one after the other. Suddenly, dark lines of force began ripping into the resistance fighters, blowing several of them away and causing terrible wounds to appear. The Legion commanders were working in concert, sending out terrible lines of destruction from their strange weapons. In response, Jason, Darstad, and a select group of resistance infantry jumped on rapt horses and began galloping towards the closest group of Legion commanders. Hecate pulled out a single shining, whip-thin sword from a sheath on his back and rocketed away on foot at great speed towards another group. Darstad rode his steed in a lurching gallop and located one of the Legion commanders within the battle. Concentrating on his attack, the young resistance colonel summoned his internal energies and focused the buildup of energy into his reinforced vibronic force weapon. As he ran his raft horse at the Legion commander, the Dark Warrior turned toward him and swiped his force weapon at Darstad. Darstad swiped his weapon at the same time and sent a line of his force at the man, which met the other and caused a loud electrical humming sound as the two lines of force blasted against each other. Darstad leapt down from his running animal and rolled, using the momentum of his roll to launch himself at the man. Their humming weapons clashed together, creating a backlash of energy and pushed both men away. The Dark Warrior recovered and sent a line of energy from his weapon at Darstad, who leapt out of its path at the last moment. All sound was of fighting men, and Jason turned and saw Darstad engaging an enemy. Each man was sending dark lines of force at the other that would periodically rip into other fighters around them. Darstad's enemy's back was facing him, and Jason threw his staff from the enemy facing his lover. The flying staff struck the Dark Warrior in the back of the shoulder blade with a loud electrical sound, causing the man to stagger forward. Darstad used that moment to leap up and strike his enemy with the full power of his focus weapon. The man's face and chest were caved in by Darstad's attack, and he fell to the ground, a lifeless husk. Darstad looked over to Jason and nodded his thanks as he bent over and picked up the fallen Legion commander's weapon and held it in his other hand. Summoning his energies into both weapons, he began sending out lines of his own force into the enemy around him. The enemy fell to the earth and screamed as his special energy slammed into them. At another area of the battle, Cerberus ran his raft horse full throttle at a Legion commander, and the Dark Warrior turned and saw him coming at the last moment. The Legion commander leapt out of the path of the running animal and sent out a lance of energy from his weapon. The energy sliced into the raft horse, who screamed and fell, causing Cerberus to fly out of the saddle and land in a heap on the ground. Cerberus picked himself up and pulled out his archaic pole-axe weapon. The Legion commander sent another lance of energy at Cerberus, who brought up the poleaxe in a reflexive movement. The energy from the Dark Warrior slammed into the weapon, but dissipated away and sputtered out into a harmless vapor. Cerberus looked down in shock at his weapon as the Dark Warrior screamed and lanced another attack at him. Once again, the weapon absorbed the energy, and Cerberus grinned as he ran full at the Dark Warrior to begin attacking with the axe weapon. Soon the Dark Warrior lay upon the ground with his hand and weapon cut in half. The man was screaming as he held the bleeding remains of his arm to his chest. Cerberus swiped the poleaxe in a fast arc, and the enemy's head rolled to the ground. The headless body fell to the earth, where it began to pour out blood from the opening where the man's head had once been. Cerberus leapt into the fray of fighting warriors around him, slicing deep into any unprotected Dark Warrior he encountered. His special weapon cut through the armor of the Dark Warriors around him, causing great wounds and injury to the enemy force. Soon, a great circle of dying and bleeding bodies began to surround the warrior as he cut them down left and right. The humming blade of his weapon sliced through weapons, limbs, and armor with a loud, vibrating sound. Elsewhere, Jason jumped off his raft horse and smacked its rear to have it run out of the dangerous area. Uttering several arcane words, he took control of the demonic wind energies that were within the area. A moment later, a freezing wind began blowing at a large portion of the Dark Warrior Legion, and icicles began forming on their metal weapons and falling from freezing cold hands. Jason broke the concentration required for the spell, and the wind fell away. His red and orange armor resonated with his staff and forearm protectors as he wildly began attacking the warriors around him with his weapon. The weapons of the enemy bounced away from him as he smashed into their ranks and with his powerful weapon. With economy and great skill, he moved among the fighting warriors to strike against unprotected flanks, plunge the spiked end of his staff through a torso, or to strike a weapon from an enemy with a crunch of bone and electrical snap of vibration from his techno weapon. Soon, Jason was surrounded by his enemies, all seeking to wear him down. The glimmering fighter deftly deflected all sword attacks with his staff and would periodically counterstrike an opponent. Enhanced by his armor, he soon had several bodies surrounding him, and with a press of attack, more and more Dark Warriors began moving toward him from all sides. Just then, several of the Resistance infantry members ran up and began defending him. Suddenly, a lucky strike from a nearby Dark Warrior sliced against an unprotected area of Jason's arm, drawing blood. Jason cried out and reacted instinctively by slamming the butt end of his staff into the man's face. The man's face disappeared in a spray of blood and bone as Jason reeled back from the small wound. Jason touched his arm. Looking at the blood on his fingers and the press of Dark Warriors all around him, Jason wiped the blood across his lips and sighed as a surge of power began to build within him. The rage came upon him once more. Jason reacted like a caged animal and began slamming his staff into anyone he got near to, no longer aiming, but simply bludgeoning anyone within his field of vision with rage-empowered strength. He uttered a roar as his staff struck out again and again, and the Dark Warriors around him were grim and stoic as he attacked them. At another area, Hecate lithely ran at the Legion commander closest to him and drew forward his two whip swords into a position of attack. His cybernetically enhanced mind calculated the best form of attack as his momentum and speed brought him to bear down upon the enemy. He momentarily slipped into the observer effect, and everything slowed down around him. The Omegan noticed the Legion commander turning toward him slowly and could see the bunching of the man's muscles and building up of energy to the vibronic force weapon to be unleashed in an attack. Hecate slipped out of the mental trance and watched the line of force coming toward him. He took a deep breath and screamed his own battle cry at the line of force. His special vibronic energy blasted away from him, to slam into the line of force and immediately sent it scattering into a million pieces of shimmering energy to disperse harmlessly around the two warriors. The gleaming man continued his run at the Legion commander, whose expression was just changing to shocked outrage as one of Hecate's whip-thin swords sliced through his neck. Hecate continued his run without stopping and passed the dying Legion commander at great speed. The man's head tumbled from his body as the glowing figure rapidly moved past him. The resistance leader continued his run and sought out another Legion commander and began running towards him. At great speed, he swiped his whip swords right and left at dark warriors in his path, causing great gashes and wounds to open wherever he struck. Dark warriors all around him were falling left and right as he moved among them like a streak of lightning. The enemy fell to the ground, screaming in pain as his special swords found their mark with extreme precision. Another Legion commander saw the Dark Warriors falling as the gleaming man ran full speed in his direction. Losing all courage, the Legion commander screamed out, "Retreat!" His Dark Warriors around him began to gather and egress back toward the forest. Soon the remaining Black Warrior Legion members that had not fallen in battle were all retreating the way they had come. Cerberus finished cutting down another warrior who fought against him and turned to witness the retreating Dark Warriors. Holding up the poleaxe above his head, he cried, "Victory!" And the remaining band of resistance forces gave a great cry and cheer. The platoon sergeant finished with deep emotion in his voice as he recounted the tale of the Lost Tavern. He finished the story by describing how the enemy had lost over half of their forces, and the new resistance force had lost only 20 men. From guerrilla tactics taught to them by General Hecate, they had pursued the Dark Warriors into the forest, hitting and disrupting the Legion for the last 2 years. The resistance plan was very simple. Using the mutant lands as a shield wall, they had set up a new headquarters located in the old quarry prison where Jason had once rescued Darstad. Now the area was a base, with billeted resistance members dotting the surrounding area with tents. Working together, they had eventually cleared a nearby section of woods into a field for the cavalry and had used the wood to build a meeting hall and several cabins. It was here at this camp that Rembley now practiced his infantry fighting tactics with Colonel Darstad. Rembley looked forward to the upcoming battle. They had pursued the Dark Warriors through the great forest mercilessly, with the mutants hindering any movement of the Dark Warriors into their territory per the agreement with Hecate. The last battle was coming as the resistance, now 1,000 strong, moved en masse toward the Dark Lord's great stronghold in the north of the Great Forest.